The restaurant hummed with the usual energy of a busy evening, waitstaff darting between tables, the clatter of dishes echoing from the kitchen, and the soft murmur of patrons lost in their conversations. Among the sea of faces that night was Lisa, a young waitress known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue. Lisa prided herself on her quick comebacks, often turning the dining room into her personal stage for humor and banter. Most customers chuckled along, but not everyone appreciated her sense of humor. That evening, as Lisa worked her way through the bustling crowd, she couldn't help but notice the man who walked through the restaurant doors. He was tall, with a broad frame and a quiet presence that seemed to fill the space. His clothes were neat but unassuming, a simple button-down shirt and slacks. Yet, what caught Lisa's attention most was his size. The man was visibly overweight, and in her eyes, he seemed out of place in the upscale restaurant. "Table for one?" Lisa asked, her tone bordering on condescending as she approached him with a forced smile. The man nodded, his expression kind but reserved. "Yes, please," he said, his voice deep and calm. Lisa grabbed a menu and gestured for him to follow her. "Right this way," she said, leading him toward a table in the far corner, near the kitchen. It wasn't the best seat in the house, but Lisa didn't seem to care. In fact, she didn't think twice about seating him there. As the man settled into his chair, Lisa handed him the menu. "Let me know if you have any questions," she said with a saccharine smile that barely masked her disinterest. Before he could respond, she turned on her heel and walked away, muttering under her breath, "Probably just here for the all-you-can-eat options." The comment wasn't meant for anyone to hear, but a fellow waitress caught it and raised an eyebrow. "That's not cool, Lisa," she whispered, shaking her head. Lisa shrugged. "What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Besides, he doesn't look like he's here to order a salad." Minutes later, Lisa returned to the man's table, pen and notepad in hand. "Ready to order?" she asked, her tone clipped. The man smiled politely and placed his order, a steak, medium rare, with a side of roasted vegetables. Lisa jotted it down, but not without raising an eyebrow. "Vegetables, huh?" she quipped, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Trying to balance it out, I see." The man's smile faltered for a moment, but he said nothing. Instead, he thanked her and handed her the menu. Lisa walked away, shaking her head. "Unbelievable," she muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes. Throughout the evening, Lisa continued her subtle jabs, making snide remarks every time she passed his table. She made sure her comments were quiet enough to avoid drawing attention, but loud enough for him to hear. To her, it was all in good fun, a way to amuse herself on a dull shift. But what Lisa didn't realize was that her actions were not going unnoticed. Other staff members, including the restaurant manager, began to observe her behavior. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others whispered among themselves, unsure of how to intervene. The man, however, remained calm and composed, his demeanor unshaken by Lisa's words. He ate his meal in silence, occasionally glancing around the restaurant as if taking in every detail. When it came time to pay the bill, the man stood up and walked over to the register. Lisa was there, busy chatting with another server. When she saw him approach, she sighed and forced a smile. "All set?" she asked, ringing up his total. He nodded, handing over his credit card. As Lisa swiped it, she couldn't resist one last comment. "Bet you're saving room for dessert," she said with a smirk. The man looked her in the eye, his expression unreadable. "Actually, I think I've had my fill for the evening," he replied, his tone steady. Lisa handed him the receipt, still unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She watched as he signed the slip, thanked her, and walked out the door. To her, it was just another night, another customer, and another opportunity to entertain herself at someone else's expense. But as the man stepped into the cool night air, a small, knowing smile played on his lips. Lisa had no idea who he really was or the turn her evening, and perhaps her entire career, was about to take. What Lisa didn't know was that this man wasn't just any customer. He held the key to the very building she worked in, the name on the deeds, and the authority to make decisions that could alter her future in an instant. But that revelation was still to come, and for now, Lisa remained blissfully unaware of the lesson she was about to learn in the most unexpected way. The restaurant had begun to wind down for the night. The dinner rush was over, and only a few tables remained occupied. Lisa leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone while waiting for the last few customers to finish their meals. She felt a sense of relief knowing her shift was almost over. Dealing with difficult customers, or in her words, entertaining herself, always made the hours feel longer. In the kitchen, the staff was wrapping up for the evening. The head chef, Marco, glanced toward the dining area through the small window in the swinging door. "That guy who left earlier," he muttered to another cook. "He looked familiar. Did you notice him?" The other cook shrugged. "Not really." "Why? Someone important?" Marco hesitated, his brow furrowed. "I don't know. I've seen his face somewhere before. Can't put my finger on it, though." The conversation was interrupted as Lisa walked into the kitchen to grab some water. "What are you guys whispering about?" she asked, curious. Marco shook his head. "Nothing. Just thought I recognized one of your customers from earlier." Big guy sat near the kitchen. Lisa rolled her eyes. "Oh, him? Yeah, he was hard to miss. Pretty sure he's just another guy trying to squeeze into a booth that doesn't fit." Marco's frown deepened, but he didn't press further. Something about the man had struck him as unusual, but Lisa's dismissive attitude was enough to shut down the conversation. She finished her water and went back to clearing tables, oblivious to the nagging feeling Marco couldn't shake. Meanwhile, across town, the man had returned to a modest but elegant home office. His jacket was draped over the back of a chair, and he sat at a large wooden desk, flipping through a stack of papers. On the desk was a folder labeled with the restaurant's name in bold letters. He opened it, scanning its contents with a thoughtful expression. He had purchased the restaurant a few years ago, entrusting the day-to-day operations to a manager while he focused on other ventures. It had been a profitable investment, known for its high-quality food and excellent service. But tonight's experience had opened his eyes to something he hadn't considered before. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, the restaurant manager, Claire, answered. "Mr. Evans," she greeted, her voice slightly surprised. "Good evening. How can I help you?" "Hi, Claire," he said. "I visited the restaurant tonight." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, I didn't realize you were coming in," she replied, her tone shifting to one of concern. "I hope everything was to your liking." "For the most part," he said evenly, "but I noticed something that concerned me. One of your waitresses, Lisa, I believe, wasn't exactly upholding the standards I expect from the staff." Claire's breath hitched. She knew Lisa could be a bit brash, but she hadn't imagined it was severe enough to catch the attention of the owner. "I see. May I ask what happened?" Mr. Evans explained the interactions in detail, recounting Lisa's comments and behavior throughout the evening. He didn't exaggerate or embellish. He simply stated the facts. By the time he finished, Claire was at a loss for words. "I'll address it immediately," she assured him, her voice firm. "This is not acceptable, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." "Thank you," Mr. Evans said. "I trust you'll handle it appropriately. But I'd also like to visit again tomorrow, unannounced. There's something I'd like to discuss with the staff." "Of course," Claire replied, though her mind was racing. She couldn't help but wonder what he had in mind. The next day, the restaurant was abuzz with its usual energy. Lisa arrived for her shift, her mood no different from the day before. She greeted her coworkers with her usual sarcastic remarks, already making jokes about the customers she might encounter. As the evening crowd began to trickle in, Evans was planning to return the same, and Claire had decided to keep it that way. Rushed off others and occasionally exchanged glances with her coworkers whenever she felt someone was being particularly difficult. But as the night progressed, Lisa began to notice something unusual. Several of her colleagues seemed tense, whispering among themselves more than usual. Even Claire seemed on edge, hovering near the front of the house and checking her watch repeatedly. "What's going on?" Lisa finally asked another waitress, Abby, as they stood near the drink station. Abby hesitated, glancing around before leaning in closer. "I think the owner is coming in tonight," she whispered. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "The owner? You mean the guy who signs our checks? Why would he bother showing up here?" Abby shrugged. "I don't know." Claire didn't say much, just that we need to be on our best behavior. Lisa scoffed. Please, it's just another rich guy with too much time on his hands. He probably wants to see how the little people are doing. Abby gave her a look of warning. I'd be careful if I were you. If he's watching, he might not like what he sees. Lisa waved her off, unwilling to take the warning seriously. To her, the idea of the owner showing up was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. She didn't plan on changing her approach for anyone, let alone someone who likely didn't even know her name. As the night wore on, Lisa's casual attitude began to clash with the growing tension in the restaurant. Staff members whispered nervously each time the door opened, wondering if it might be him. Lisa, meanwhile, continued her usual antics, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. Then, just as the dinner rush was hitting its peak, the door swung open, and in walked Mr. Evans. This time, he wasn't alone. Claire hurried to greet him, her expression polite but strained. Lisa watched from a distance, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the man from the night before. No way, she muttered to herself. What's he doing back here? She didn't have to wonder for long. Mr. Evans scanned the restaurant with a calm but purposeful gaze. When his eyes landed on Lisa, a flicker of recognition passed between them. He gave her a small nod, and she felt an unexpected wave of unease. For the first time, Lisa found herself questioning whether her actions the night before had been noticed, or worse, remembered. But even as doubt crept in, she brushed it aside. After all, what could he possibly do? He was just a customer, wasn't he? The night carried on, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. She felt the weight of Mr. Evans's presence, even when he wasn't looking her way. And as the hours ticked by, she couldn't help but wonder if this ordinary evening was about to take an extraordinary turn. The air in the restaurant felt heavier than usual as the staff continued their work. Mr. Evans remained seated at a corner table, quietly observing the ebb and flow of the evening. He appeared calm, but there was an undeniable gravity in his demeanor that had everyone on edge. Lisa tried to keep her composure, convincing herself that his presence was coincidental. Maybe he just liked the food and decided to come back. That's all it had to be, right? Claire was another story. She darted between the kitchen and the dining area, her usual confidence replaced with a nervous energy. She knew Mr. Evans wasn't the type to drop in without a purpose, and his choice to stay so low-key only made it more unnerving. Every time she passed him, he offered her a polite nod, but there was an unreadable expression behind his eyes, one that made her feel like he was silently taking notes. Lisa, however, chose to treat the night as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. She continued to serve her tables, throwing in her usual sarcasm and light banter where she felt it fit. But as she passed Mr. Evans's table, she couldn't resist glancing his way. He caught her eye, and for a split second, she thought she saw the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't warm or friendly, it was knowing, almost amused. It sent a chill down her spine, but she quickly shook it off and kept moving. Back in the kitchen, the whispers had grown louder. Marco, still trying to place Mr. Evans's face, was now openly discussing his theories with the other cooks. I'm telling you, I've seen that guy somewhere before, Marco said, slicing vegetables with more vigor than usual. And it's not just because he's the owner. There's something else. Maybe he's been in the news, one of the younger cooks suggested, flipping through their phone in an attempt to look him up. Rich people are always in the news. Claire overheard the conversation as she entered the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Can we not speculate right now? She said, her voice sharper than intended. Just focus on your work. The last thing we need is for him to think we're unprofessional. Marco raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The tension in the kitchen was palpable, mirroring the unease that had settled over the rest of the staff. Claire knew she couldn't keep everyone calm much longer. Out on the floor, Lisa was starting to feel the strain herself. For all her bravado, she couldn't ignore the way her coworkers kept sneaking glances toward Mr. Evans. Even customers seemed to notice the unusual energy in the room, with a few asking their servers if something special was happening. Each time, the staff offered vague responses, unwilling to explain the truth. By now, Lisa's curiosity had started to override her initial indifference. She noticed how Mr. Evans interacted with Claire, the way he gestured toward the staff as if discussing something specific. Her instincts told her this wasn't just a casual visit, and it made her increasingly uneasy. She replayed her interactions with him from the night before in her mind, questioning whether she'd gone too far with her comments. At one point, as she was clearing a table nearby, she overheard bits of their conversation. "A few adjustments need to be made," Mr. Evans was saying, his tone measured but firm. "It's important that every member of the team understands the standards we expect." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. Adjustments? Standards? Was he talking about her? She couldn't be sure, but the thought gnawed at her. For the first time in her career, she felt genuinely unsure of her footing. As the evening progressed, Mr. Evans remained an enigmatic presence, speaking occasionally with Claire and quietly observing the staff. He made no dramatic announcements, no sudden declarations of authority. And yet, his silence was more unsettling than any loud proclamation could have been. Then, just when Lisa thought the night couldn't get more uncomfortable, a new twist emerged. A man in a tailored suit entered the restaurant, carrying a leather briefcase. He was tall, with a professional air that immediately drew attention. Claire greeted him at the door, her face pale. After a brief exchange, she led him to Mr. Evans's table. The two men shook hands before sitting down, their conversation low and serious. Lisa couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was clear this wasn't a casual meeting. The suited man pulled several documents from his briefcase, spreading them across the table. Mr. Evans leaned forward, scanning the papers with a focused expression. Lisa's anxiety spiked. Who was this man? And why did he seem so important? She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening at that table would have consequences for everyone in the restaurant, herself included. Across the room, Abby caught Lisa's eye and gave her a small shrug, as if to say, "I don't know what's going on either." Lisa nodded, but her stomach churned with unease. Eventually, Claire approached Lisa with a forced smile. "Lisa, could you bring a fresh pot of coffee to table 7? She asked, gesturing toward Mr. Evans's table. Lisa hesitated. "Me?" "Yes, you," Claire said firmly. "Just do it, please." Reluctantly, Lisa grabbed the coffee pot and made her way to the table. Her hands felt clammy, and she was hyper-aware of every step she took. When she reached the table, she put on her best professional smile. "Would you gentlemen like some more coffee?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Mr. Evans looked up at her, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "Yes, please," he said simply. As Lisa poured the coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being scrutinized. The suited man glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the papers, but Mr. Evans's gaze lingered. "Thank you," he said, his tone polite but carrying an undertone she couldn't quite place. "You're welcome," Lisa replied, quickly retreating to the safety of the kitchen. Once inside, she leaned against the counter, her heart pounding. She didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary night, and whatever Mr. Evans had planned, it was far from over. The restaurant buzzed softly as the clock ticked toward closing time, but the weight of the evening's strange energy had only intensified. Lisa found herself glancing over her shoulder more often, her confidence replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. Mr. Evans and the man in the suit were still seated at table 7, their low voices and occasional glances keeping everyone on edge. The pile of documents between them seemed to hold some kind of power, and every time Mr. Evans scribbled something on a page, Lisa felt a chill. Claire's demeanor hadn't improved. She paced near the front desk, her usually composed appearance unraveling as the night wore on. When Lisa passed her to pick up an order, she caught the faintest tremble in Claire's hands. It wasn't like her to be so rattled, and it only made Lisa more nervous. In the kitchen, Marco was unusually quiet. He worked diligently, but his usual chatter with the other cooks was absent. Everyone seemed to know this night was different, though no one dared to say it outright. Even the customers, mostly unaware of the undercurrent of tension, seemed subdued, speaking in quieter tones as if sensing something brewing beneath the surface. Lisa tried to distract herself by focusing on her tables, but her curiosity kept pulling her attention back to table 7. She told herself it was nothing, that Mr. Evans probably just wanted to discuss business with Claire or the suited man. but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was about her. Her suspicion was confirmed when Claire suddenly approached her with a strained smile. "Lisa," she said, her voice tight, "Mr. Evans would like to speak with you." Lisa froze. "Me? Why?" Claire's expression faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. "He didn't say. Just, please be professional." Lisa felt a rush of heat rise to her cheeks as her heart thudded in her chest. She nodded stiffly, wiping her hands on her apron before heading toward the table. Each step felt heavier than the last, and by the time she reached them, she was struggling to keep her hands from trembling. Mr. Evans looked up as she approached, his expression calm but unreadable. The man in the suit remained focused on the papers, his pen moving swiftly as he made notes. "Lisa," Mr. Evans said, gesturing for her to sit in the empty chair across from him. She hesitated. "Is something wrong?" "Not necessarily," he replied, his tone steady. "Please sit." Reluctantly, Lisa sank into the chair, her mind racing. She avoided his gaze, staring at the papers on the table instead. They were contracts, employee files, and what looked like financial statements. Her name was printed in bold on one of the folders, and her stomach churned at the sight. "Do you know who I am?" Mr. Evans asked after a moment of silence. Lisa swallowed hard. "You're the owner, right?" He nodded. "That's correct. I purchased this restaurant a few years ago, though I've left most of the day-to-day operations in Claire's capable hands." He paused, his gaze steady. "Last night, I decided to visit as a customer to see how things were running." Lisa's heart sank. She could feel the heat rising to her face as she realized where this conversation was heading. I hope everything was okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Evans tilted his head slightly, studying her. "That's an interesting question. Tell me, Lisa, do you believe every customer deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their appearance or background?" Lisa's throat tightened. She forced herself to meet his gaze, but the weight of his question hung heavily in the air. "Of course," she said, though her voice wavered. "Good," he replied, "because I noticed some comments and behavior last night that didn't align with that standard." His tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm, and it left no room for excuses. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She felt exposed, as though every sarcastic remark and dismissive glance from the night before was laid bare before her. "I understand that we all have off days," Mr. Evans continued, his tone measured. "But this restaurant has built its reputation on more than just good food. It's about the experience we provide, the way we make people feel when they walk through these doors. That's something I take very seriously." Lisa's chest tightened, and she nodded slowly. I'm sorry if I." Mr. Evans held up a hand, cutting her off gently. "This isn't about apologies, Lisa. It's about understanding the impact of our actions. Your words may seem harmless to you, but to someone else, they can carry far more weight." The words struck a chord deep within her, and for the first time, Lisa felt the full gravity of her behavior. She glanced at the man in the suit, who was now watching her with a neutral expression, as if evaluating her reaction. "I'm not here to embarrass you or single you out," Mr. Evans said, his voice softening slightly. "But I am here to ensure that this restaurant reflects the values it was built on. I need to know if you're willing to be part of that vision." Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel every pair of eyes in the restaurant on her, though she didn't dare look around to confirm. The weight of the moment was almost unbearable, but she nodded. "I understand," she said quietly, "and I want to do better." Mr. Evans studied her for a moment before nodding. "That's all I needed to hear." With that, he stood, gathering the papers on the table and tucking them into the briefcase. Lisa watched as he exchanged a few quiet words with Claire before heading toward the door. As the door closed behind him, the tension in the restaurant seemed to release all at once. Conversations resumed. The clatter of dishes filled the air, and the world felt as though it was moving again. Lisa remained seated for a moment, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't fully untangle. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure: this night had changed everything. Lisa sat at the table long after Mr. Evans had left, her thoughts tangled in a mess of regret, embarrassment, and confusion. She replayed his words over and over, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She wanted to believe it was over, that she had been given a warning and could move forward. But something about the way he'd spoken, calm, composed, and deliberate, left her with an unsettled feeling. It was as if there was more he hadn't said, and the thought gnawed at her. Claire approached quietly, her usual brisk pace replaced with hesitant steps. She placed a hand on Lisa's shoulder, her face a mix of concern and relief. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Lisa nodded, though her mind was far from settled. "He's intense," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire gave a small, almost nervous laugh. "He's a good man, but yes, he has a way of getting his point across. Don't take it personally, it's just how he is." But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that it was personal. She'd seen the look in Mr. Evans's eyes when he spoke to her, a look that seemed to carry more weight than simple feedback. It was as if he was challenging her, testing her in some way she didn't yet understand. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Lisa went through the motions, her usual sarcastic banter replaced by quiet politeness. Her coworkers gave her space, sensing the shift in her demeanor, and even the customers seemed less demanding. But despite the relative calm, Lisa's thoughts remained restless. As she was finishing up for the night, Marco emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He gave her a pointed look, his usual light-hearted demeanor replaced with something more serious. "You got a visitor," he said, nodding toward the front of the restaurant. Lisa frowned, her stomach twisting with unease. "A visitor? Who?" Marco shrugged, but the look in his eyes told her he knew more than he was letting on. "Better go see for yourself." Reluctantly, Lisa made her way to the front of the restaurant, her heart pounding with each step. When she reached the entrance, she froze. Standing just outside the door, illuminated by the glow of the streetlights, was the man in the suit who had been sitting with Mr. Evans earlier. He was holding a sleek leather folder, his expression unreadable. Lisa hesitated before stepping outside, the cool night air hitting her like a wake-up call. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary. The man nodded. "Miss Turner," he said, his tone formal, "my name is Daniel Grayson. I'm Mr. Evans's legal representative." Lisa blinked, caught off guard. "Legal representative? Why would I?" He held up a hand, cutting her off. "I'm here to deliver this," he said, handing her the leather folder. "Mr. Evans requested that you read it tonight." Lisa took the folder reluctantly, her hand shaking slightly. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Instructions," Daniel replied simply. "He believes it's important for you to understand your position and your potential." Lisa's brow furrowed in confusion. What does that even mean? Daniel didn't elaborate. Instead, he gave her a small nod and turned to leave. "Good luck, Miss Turner," he said over his shoulder before disappearing into the night. Lisa stared after him, the folder clutched tightly in her hands. She wanted to rip it open right there, but something about the moment felt too surreal, too heavy. Instead, she waited until she was back inside the restaurant, seated at one of the empty tables near the kitchen. With trembling hands, she opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. The first page was a letter, typed neatly on thick, expensive paper. At the top was the restaurant's logo, and beneath it, Mr. Evans's signature. Lisa began to read, her eyes scanning the words quickly, though her brain struggled to keep up. The letter wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a termination notice or a reprimand. It was an invitation. Mr. Evans had outlined a proposal, one that seemed almost too absurd to believe. He wanted her to take on a larger role in the restaurant, to undergo training and potentially move into management. But the letter wasn't just an offer, it was also a challenge. Mr. Evans had included specific notes about her behavior, pointing out moments of potential he'd observed amidst her flaws. He believed she had the ability to lead, to inspire others, but only if she was willing to confront her own shortcomings and change. Lisa's heart raced as she read the final line. Asterisk, the choice is yours, Lisa. Prove me right, or prove me wrong. Asterisk. She sat back in her chair, the letter trembling in her hands. It was an opportunity unlike anything she'd ever imagined, but it came with a price. She would have to earn it, to prove to herself and to Mr. Evans that she was capable of more than sarcasm and indifference. And for the first time in her life, Lisa wasn't sure if she was up to the task. Before she could dwell on it further, Marco appeared at her side, his expression curious. "What's in the folder?" he asked, nodding toward the papers. Lisa hesitated, then handed him the letter. "Read it," she said simply, her voice hollow. Marco skimmed the letter, his eyebrows raising as he reached the end. "Wow," he said, looking at her with newfound respect. "Didn't see that coming." "Me neither," Lisa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Marco gave her a small smile. "Well, looks like you've got a big decision to make." Lisa nodded, her mind spinning with possibilities and doubts. She couldn't help but feel like this was only the beginning, that Mr. Evans's challenge was just the first step in something much larger. And as the weight of the moment settled over her, she realized that whatever choice she made, her life would never be the same. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Lisa. She couldn't stop thinking about the letter, the offer, and the way Mr. Evans had seemed to see something in her that she hadn't even seen in herself. At first, she was convinced it was a mistake. Maybe he had misread her, or maybe this was some kind of test she wasn't meant to pass. But as the days went on, a small voice inside her kept asking, asterisk, what if he's right, asterisk? Lisa decided she needed answers, and the only way to get them was to face Mr. Evans directly. She asked Claire for his contact information, and with some hesitation, Claire gave her his email. Lisa spent hours drafting a message, erasing and rewriting until she settled on something simple. Asterisk, Eve read the letter. "I want to talk." Asterisk. The response came faster than she expected. Mr. Evans invited her to meet him at the restaurant after hours, a time when it would be empty and quiet. The thought of being alone with him in that setting sent a shiver of anxiety through her, but she knew she couldn't back out now. When she arrived, the restaurant felt eerily still. The lights were dimmed, and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound. Mr. Evans was seated at a table near the center, a folder in front of him and a calm expression on his face. He stood as she approached, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for coming," he said, his tone as composed as ever. Lisa sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about what you wrote," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "And I guess I just want to know, why me? Why would you offer me this chance after the way I acted?" Mr. Evans leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Because I see potential in you," he said simply. "You may not see it in yourself yet, but I do. The way you handled yourself after our conversation, the effort you've put in these past few days, it shows me that you're capable of growth. And that's what matters." Lisa felt a flicker of hope at his words, but she still wasn't convinced. "What if I mess it up?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm not good enough?" Mr. Evans smiled faintly, a rare warmth in his otherwise serious demeanor. "Everyone messes up, Lisa. The question is whether you're willing to learn from it. This isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, trying, and taking responsibility for your actions." The simplicity of his answer struck her, and for the first time, she felt like this opportunity might not be as impossible as it seemed. She nodded slowly, a small spark of determination flickering to life inside her. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." Mr. Evans' smile widened slightly. "I'm glad to hear that." The conversation shifted to logistics, training schedules, responsibilities, and expectations. Lisa found herself growing more comfortable as they talked, her initial fear giving way to excitement. But just as she began to relax, Mr. Evans leaned forward, his expression turning serious once again. "There's one more thing you should know," he said, his voice quieter now. "This isn't just about you. It's about the future of this restaurant." Lisa frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Mr. Evans opened the folder in front of him and slid a piece of paper across the table. Lisa's eyes widened as she read the bold heading at the top. Asterisk transfer of ownership agreement asterisk. Her heart raced as she looked up at him. "Wait, are you saying?" "I'm planning to step back from the business," Mr. Evans said, cutting her off gently. "I've built this restaurant from the ground up, but it's time for me to move on to other ventures. I've been looking for someone to take over, someone who understands what this place means, not just to me, but to the community. Lisa's mind reeled as she tried to process his words. But why me? I'm not ready for something like that. Not yet, Mr. Evans agreed, but with the right guidance, I believe you could be. This isn't something that will happen overnight, Lisa. It's a process, one that requires trust, effort, and time. But if you're willing to commit, I'm willing to teach you everything I know. Lisa stared at him, her thoughts spinning. She had come here expecting a simple conversation, maybe even a second chance to prove herself. But this was something entirely different. The weight of the offer was overwhelming, but beneath the fear, there was a spark of something else: hope, excitement, and the faintest hint of belief in herself. She looked back at Mr. Evans, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, but I'm willing to try. Mr. Evans nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That's all I needed to hear. As Lisa left the restaurant that night, the cool air felt different against her skin. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like it was hers to shape. Little did she know, the path ahead would be more challenging and more rewarding than she could ever imagine.